Haddon Irving Clark was born on July 31st, 1952 in Troy, New York, the second of 4 children born to Haddon Clark Sr. and his wife Flavia. And for the sake of keeping names organized, I'm going to be referring to the father simply as Senior for the rest of the video. From the very beginning, something was wrong. Haddon was slow to develop in glaring ways. He was still not speaking properly, long after most children his age were stringing together complete sentences. Where peers were running and playing, he was stumbling over his own feet. His mother attributed his unusual behavior to the circumstances of his birth. She believed that a bad forceps delivery had caused a head injury at the moment he entered the world, damaging him before he ever even had a chance. When Haddon was 4 years old, Flavia made the decision to take him to the Yale Child Study Center for formal evaluation. The doctors there confirmed her fears. Haddon had a mild case of cerebral palsy and what appeared to be mild brain damage. His father, Senior, a physical chemist with advanced degrees and little patience, had a volatile response to the diagnosis. When he was drinking, he called his son, quote, the retard. When sober, Senior was much more tame, but nevertheless, his son absorbed and held onto those words for the rest of his life. The Clark household moved constantly as a result of Senior's restless professional ambition. He held a PhD in chemistry and an MBA, had invented both plastic wrap and fire-retardant carpeting, and earned substantial money throughout his career. But no matter how much he earned, he could never save a penny, and he was never satisfied staying in one place or with one employer for long. The family relocated to various wealthy suburbs in various states, including New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. Summers were spent vacationing at Block Island, where Flavia's parents kept a summer cottage, and at Wellfleet, Massachusetts on Cape Cod, where Senior's parents had retired. These 2 locations would later become significant years down the line. This constant uprooting made Haddon's already difficult social and academic situation worse. Each new town meant a new school, new classmates who didn't know him or had no patience for his oddities, and no established relationships to fall on. Due to his speech, behavior, and general approach to processing situations, he was an easy target for other children. Life at home was not much better. Both Senior and Flavia were alcoholics. When they drank, they did not hide conflict from their children. The children grew up watching their parents physically attack each other, absorbing the idea that violence was a natural progression after frustration. Within the family, Haddon occupied a strange and painful position. His disabilities required extra attention from Flavia and cost the family money. Haddon's twice-weekly visits to psychologists were an expense that his father openly resented. His older brother Bradfield and younger brother Jeffrey both noticed that their mother gave Haddon disproportionate focus, and they resented it, each dealing with the imbalance in their own way. His younger sister Allison would later run away from home and be placed in a psychiatric institution. The family was slowly collapsing. Haddon's psychologist, aware of his family's dynamics, advised Flavia not to directly confront Haddon about his various tendencies. This was primarily in reference to his cross-dressing. Professionals suggested that doing so could cause a major rupture within Haddon's psyche. Flavia was later quoted saying, "If you're paying people all this money, you listen." So she never confronted her son, and the behavior continued unchecked. Growing up, Haddon failed 2 grades in elementary school. In 1962, Haddon was enrolled in a school specifically for children with special needs. The next year, when the family moved again, he was placed at a boarding school for the learning disabled, where he spent 3 years and notably made genuine progress. The structured environment, the stability, and perhaps the physical distance from his volatile household may have been exactly what he needed. But in 1967, another attempt was made to insert him into a regular junior high school. Despite the social difficulties this created, he managed to cope. He eventually graduated high school, dividing his classes between a regular school and a technical one, finishing as the oldest student in his graduating class. He graduated in 1972 when he was just under 21 years old. As for the topic of cross-dressing, it wasn't something that Haddon had stumbled upon on his own. In fact, it was introduced to him by his own mother. According to multiple sources and Haddon's own later statements, Flavia dressed him in frilly girl's clothing when she was drunk, and during these episodes, she would address him as Kristen, a female name that Haddon would later adopt as an alias. Whether this was done as punishment, as a form of mockery, or as an expression of some other distorted psychology on her part, the effect on the child was profound. It sent a message that his authentic self was unacceptable, and that femininity was something to be imposed as humiliation, and that the name Kristen was connected to degradation and powerlessness. By the time Haddon was in his mid-teens, the cross-dressing had moved from something done to him to something he did himself. In 1968, when he was 16 years old, a neighbor for whom he was doing yard work for returned home to find him in her bedroom, dressed in her nightgown. The incident was alarming, but it seems that it didn't result in anything serious. The following year, his own parents caught him cross-dressing at home. Around this same time, Allison's dolls had gone missing, and both Flavia and Allison noticed that their underwear was disappearing. Shortly after his parents discovered the voluntary cross-dressing, Haddon was also charged by police for a peeping Tom incident. His father's response to catching him in the act was expectedly brutal. Rather than seeking help or attempting to understand what was happening with his son, Senior beat the teenager with a belt while he was naked and vulnerable, just out of the bathtub. This was his so-called attempt at curing the boy of his issues. Furthermore, at some point in his youth, Haddon claimed to his mother that his brother had assaulted him in a treehouse. His brother denied it, leading to Flavia choosing to ignore the allegation entirely. Whether the assault occurred or not, the fact that Haddon made the claim and was dismissed added to his already large feeling of insignificance. To make matters more severe, Haddon showed a proclivity to harming animals. His brother Jeffrey later recalled that Haddon kept various animals like hamsters, possums, squirrels, and more, and they would often end up dead. He would even go so far as to dissect them. This eventually evolved into cruel and targeted retaliation. When other children bullied him, Haddon did not fight back through conventional means. Instead, he decapitated their pets. He also displayed a lack of basic empathy from an early age. On one occasion, Haddon rammed his bicycle into Jeffrey's during a contest, sending Jeffrey crashing to the pavement, where he lay bleeding heavily from a head wound. Haddon's response was not to help or get their parents. He simply rode home and told his mother, "Don't worry, Jeff's bike is okay." Reflecting on this event, Jeffrey said, "Haddon's sense of reality has always been askew. Despite the cumulative weight of his childhood difficulties, Haddon managed to pursue his one genuine passion in cooking. He was accepted by the Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park, New York, and completed the program, earning an Associate in Occupational Studies degree in January 1974. It was the singular achievement of his life that carried any real pride. He could perform at a high level in the kitchen when he chose to, but the kitchen also revealed his pathology in raw form. Co-workers at various restaurants were horrified to discover Haddon chugging beef blood directly from containers in the kitchen. This behavior disturbed his colleagues and contributed to his inability to hold any job for more than a few months. He held 14 different jobs between 1974 and 1982, cycling through positions at restaurants, country clubs, bakeries, and hotels across Cape Cod and elsewhere. In the summer of 1982, after losing a job in Colorado and turning up at his mother's home in Meriden, Connecticut, where she had moved to care for her widowed father, Haddon's presence degenerated quickly. On March 31st, 1982, he attacked her, kicking and beating her. Flavia, genuinely frightened and hoping that criminal charges might force Haddon into the psychiatric treatment she had been advocating for years, pressed assault and battery charges. But Haddon was not prosecuted. That summer, as if trying to impose structure on his unraveling life, Haddon enlisted in the United States Navy through an apprenticeship program. He was eventually assigned to an aircraft carrier as a below-deck cook. For a time, the assignment appeared to provide the structure his life lacked. Then, toward the end of 1984, after a period of escalating problems aboard ship, he claimed that several crewmates ambushed him in the dark, beat him severely, and smashed his head against the aircraft carrier's deck. In subsequent years, he would return to this beating again and again, insisting it was, quote, the beginning of all my troubles. Before his formal admission to a naval hospital in Virginia in March 1985, he was apprehended twice under bizarre circumstances, once at an airport and once at a department store. These events aren't well documented, but Haddon's behavior was described as alarming. X-rays of his skull came back negative, but his admission diagnosis was an acute psychotic episode. His brother Jeffrey said something in this beating changed him. Probably it was a combination of the actual beating of his head and some emotional stuff that happened afterwards. Instead of just being carelessly dangerous, he was then somehow able to justify his later actions. When he came back from the Navy, he was so different. I had him move out because I was afraid of him. On June 22, 1985, Haddon received an honorable medical discharge from the Navy with a 50% disability rating. His formal diagnosis at discharge stated he had paranoid schizophrenia. He was 32 years old, homeless, without a permanent address, and carrying a diagnosis that would define him for the rest of his life. After his discharge, Jeffrey allowed Haddon to move into the basement of his rented house in Silver Spring, Maryland. Initially, the arrangement appeared to work well. Haddon did chores around the house, cycled through kitchen jobs, and spent time with Jeffrey's 3 children, who were between 5 and 8 years old. Jeffrey described the dynamic with the kids as both warm and horrific. He was quoted saying, "Here was this 6'2" man who was their emotional age. He was a playmate, but a playmate who could drive a truck to the park and choose the biggest swing. A playmate with money to buy them treats and to teach them how to kill, skin, butcher, and cook rabbits he raised in a backyard pen." Within months, the so-called playmate became a threat. Haddon demanded changes to a repayment schedule on money he had loaned Jeffrey for the house purchase. He was also arrested for shoplifting women's lingerie, for which Jeffrey had to bail him out of jail. Additionally, Jeffrey mentioned that Haddon would engage in bizarre, deviant behavior while at home. This behavior was severe enough that Jeffrey asked him to leave. He informed Haddon that he needed to move out by the 26th of May, and here is where we have to introduce another individual by the name of Michelle Dorr. Michelle was a cheerful, outgoing 6-year-old girl also from Silver Spring. She was the daughter of Carl, who lived 2 houses down from Jeffrey. Because Jeffrey had 3 children of his own, Michelle was a regular presence around their home as she and Jeffrey's daughter were playmates. Now on May 26th, the deadline for which Haddon was supposed to move out, Jeffrey was planning to be gone for the day. He was dating the woman who would later become his second wife and did not want Haddon to intersect with her life. He told Haddon he could collect his remaining belongings and be gone by the end of the day. Haddon arrived at Jeffrey's house that afternoon. Michelle, meanwhile, had been spending the holiday with her father, Carl. Her parents were separated and Carl had custody on this day. While Carl settled in to watch the Indianapolis 500 on television, Michelle wandered outside. She had apparently decided to walk the 2 houses down to see if Jeffrey's daughter was around to play. She arrived at the Clark house just as Haddon was there, gathering the last of his items. What happened next has been reconstructed from later confessions and physical evidence. Haddon was the only person in the house at the time and took Michelle upstairs to a bedroom. Once there, Haddon first cut a Z-shaped incision into her back with a 12-inch chef's knife. He then slashed her throat, killing her. Later case notes stated that Michelle bit Haddon during the attack. After she was dead, Haddon attempted to assault her corpse but failed. He then drank some of her blood and ate a piece of her flesh before wrapping her body in a duffel bag. He loaded the bag into his white Nissan pickup truck and drove approximately 12 miles south toward Baltimore to a wooded area near Old Columbia Pike. There, he dug a shallow grave in the woods and buried her, still in her pink and white bathing suit she had been wearing when she walked over to play. Eventually, Carl noticed Michelle was gone. He searched the neighborhood, growing more frantic as the hours passed. When he called the police and reported her missing, the investigation began immediately. Haddon, who had been seen at Jeffrey's house that afternoon and had interacted with Michelle, was identified as a person of interest. On June 8, 1986, 9 days after Michelle's disappearance, detectives summoned Haddon to the station for questioning. When the questioning turned to what he knew about Michelle, Haddon reacted in a way that should have demanded far more follow-up than it received. He started to cry. Then he ran to the bathroom and vomited. He returned, composed himself partially, and then delivered a statement that functions as one of the most chilling near confessions in the record. He said, "I may have done something I don't remember. Sometimes I black out and do things I can't remember." This was a direct statement of possible involvement paired with a schizophrenia-rooted claim of amnesia. But in the end, officials chose to release him. The investigation then took a catastrophic wrong turn. Carl was in the middle of a bitter separation and custody dispute with Michelle's mother. Investigators who had been watching Carl's emotional state during the search noticed that he was prone to fits of guilt. He had been watching TV instead of keeping an eye on his daughter when she disappeared, and that guilt was consuming him. Under intensive police questioning, he broke down and provided a false, self-incriminating statement, telling investigators he was involved in his daughter's death. Of course, we know that this wasn't the case, but by the time investigators cleared him, the momentum of the investigation had collapsed entirely. Haddon was no longer an active suspect, and the case went cold and remained that way for over a decade. By the summer of 1988, Haddon was living transiently, sleeping in his white Nissan pickup truck, and holding jobs at bagel shops and gardening businesses. That summer, he rented a basement room from a couple, the Mahoney family. When they asked him to leave, telling friends and investigators they found him crazy and evil, Haddon first took revenge. Before moving out, he placed a 10-gallon oil can over the door so that it would spill on anyone who opened it. He also sprayed black dye across the living room floor and hid rotting fish heads inside the piano, the chimney, and the stove. If all that were not enough, he also killed the family's cats, placing one on the welcome mat at the front door and leaving the other inside the stove. And finally, before leaving, he stole various items from the home. He later boasted to others about taking revenge on people whom he felt had wronged him. On Christmas Day, 1988, he was pulled over while speeding in Montgomery County, Maryland, and police found an unregistered, loaded .38 caliber Astra handgun in his truck. He received a suspended sentence and probation, walking away without jail time. Just weeks later, in February 1989, he was arrested on a 17-count criminal indictment, 15 charges of theft, and 1 count of possession of controlled paraphernalia. He had been dressing as a woman and robbing churches, specifically stealing purses, wallets, and coats from the robing rooms of 2 churches. When Officer Mary Carlin stopped him and discovered women's wigs and dresses and multiple wallets containing credit cards and driver's licenses belonging to other women, Haddon looked at her directly and stated, "I'm a woman." A forensic psychiatrist examined him and declared him legally competent to stand trial. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of theft and received a sentence of 18 months, which the judge promptly suspended down to just 45 days, which was the same time he had already served in pretrial detention. He was then placed on 3 years of supervised probation. The judge stated, "Defendant has serious mental problems and is now addressing them in the community." His probation ended in September of 1992, and it was around this time when he ran into a woman named Laura Hoodling. Laura was 23 years old, just starting her adult life, having graduated from the National Cathedral School in 1987 and from Harvard University in January 1992, where she concentrated in history and founded the Leverett House Women's Group. After Harvard, she spent time traveling abroad before returning to the Washington area, where she had recently landed a job at Holman Communications, a DC public relations firm, starting just a month earlier. She lived with her mother, Penny, a psychotherapist, in a split-level house on the corner of Juilliard Drive and Ashburton Lane in Bethesda, Maryland. Penny had hired Haddon as a part-time gardener, paying him about $7 an hour for 4-hour shifts, usually once a week. He used her home address as his mailing address occasionally as well. Additionally, Penny had become something of a maternal figure to Haddon, or rather, he had developed an intense one-sided attachment to Penny that she was unaware of. When Laura returned home after Harvard and moved back in with her mother, Penny's attention naturally shifted toward her daughter. Haddon noticed the shift. At some point before October, Penny had also confronted Haddon about missing items, including her pearls, underwear, and other personal clothing. In Haddon's face, she stated that she suspected him of stealing her items. The combination of Penny's affection, now directed toward her daughter, and the accusation over the stolen items appears to have been the trigger. On October 14th, 1992, Haddon made a purchase at a Heckinger hardware store. This purchase included 2 rolls of duct tape, a coil of braided rope, and 3 packages of mason line. In the memo line of the receipt, Haddon had written the name Laura. Penny left on Saturday, October 17th to drive to North Carolina, where she was attending a Journey into Wholeness conference studying Jungian psychology and Christian spirituality. The last person to speak with Laura was a work colleague who called her around 10:30 p.m. on Sunday, October 18th. Haddon had a spare key to the Hoodling home that he had obtained from the garden shed. He entered the house through the back at some point on the evening of October 18th. He was dressed, according to his later accounts, in Penny's clothing and a wig, carrying his unloaded .22 caliber rifle with him. Haddon found Laura in the house and, using the unloaded rifle as a visual threat, forced her to undress and take a bath. Investigators interpreted this as a ritualistic cleansing act. After the bath, he brought her to the bedroom. He bound her wrists with duct tape, then her ankles. He then covered her eyes, her mouth, her nose, and eventually her entire head with duct tape, suffocating her. He then proceeded to stab her. Before removing her body from the house, he cut off one of her earlobes with scissors to remove her earring, taking it as a trophy. He wrapped her body in a bedsheet and carried her out. His campsite was located on a 19-acre wooded tract of land near the exit ramp from Old Georgetown Road to northbound Interstate 270, less than a mile from the home. He buried Laura there in a shallow grave close to his campsite in the dense undergrowth. The next morning, Laura's co-workers wondered why she hadn't arrived. Haddon dressed himself in khaki pants, a full-length trench coat, white socks, slip-on women's shoes in a size 12, and a shoulder-length wig. He then walked out the front door of the Hoodling home on Juilliard Drive in full view of the street. A housekeeper employed by a neighbor was outside with her employer's son, waiting for the school bus. She watched what she assumed was Laura leaving for work. The housekeeper had seen Penny and Laura leave together regularly and noted it was unusual that the younger woman was alone that morning, but she had no reason to look more closely. Laura was about 6 feet tall, so Haddon, standing at 6'2", passed the eye test. Later that same day, Haddon's storage unit records showed that he accessed his storage unit at American Self-Service Storage in Kensington twice, first at 9:41 a.m. and then again at 4:32 p.m. He had not mentioned either visit to Detective Golian when asked to account for his movements that Monday. He had also gone to Sears and bought a white queen-size bottom sheet. His mileage log revealed that on October 20th and 21st he drove more than 1,000 miles, and records from a storage facility in Warwick, Rhode Island confirmed he had been there on the morning of October 21st. He was disposing of evidence and methodically covering his tracks. On October 22nd, Haddon mailed a sympathy card to Penny's address. He added a handwritten note which said, "Just please give me a call when you're ready to do some gardening again, and I can also bring you bagels on Friday too." When Laura failed to show up at Holman Communications on the morning of October 19th, Diana Holman, her boss, was immediately alarmed. Her daughter Hillary drove to Penny and Laura's house, found the front door unanswered, entered through the unlocked sliding garden door, and searched the house. Laura's black leather coach briefcase, which she took with her every day, was missing, but nothing else appeared immediately wrong. By evening, Warren, Laura's older brother, had also gone to the house and conducted his own search, including the basement crawl space. He and a friend then retraced the route Laura would have walked to the metro station, using flashlights in the dark, looking for any sign of her. As they walked, they saw Haddon's white Nissan truck approaching from down the road. Warren recognized it as his mother's gardener's vehicle. He moved toward the passenger door, intending to ask if Haddon had seen Laura, but Haddon hit the gas and made a sharp U-turn, driving past the two men. Warren assumed perhaps Haddon hadn't recognized him in the dark, though he later noted it was difficult not to recognize him given that Warren was 6'7". Detective Ed Golian logged Warren's account of the U-turn and immediately flagged it as suspicious. When Golian mentioned Haddon to Penny when she returned, she simply said, "Haddon wouldn't hurt anyone, he's just the gardener." 45 minutes after that conversation, a Montgomery County officer contacted Ed Golian with a piece of information that changed the trajectory of the case. The officer said, if you'll recall, Haddon Clark was a suspect in the Michelle Dorr case. On Friday, October 23rd, Sergeant Jim Hennessy walked the area around the Hoodling house again with an officer from the K-9 unit and a dog trained to detect fresh human scent. They proceeded toward the wooded area where Haddon routinely parked his truck overnight, approximately 300 yards from the Hoodling home. The dog entered the woods from one side while Hennessy entered from the other. 2 minutes in, the officer found something. At the base of a tree, he had found a pillow. The outer pillowcase was covered with what appeared to be dried blood. The pillow had not been infested by insects and showed signs of having been placed there only recently. Hennessy noted that it appeared to match the pillows he had seen in Laura's bedroom when he had searched the house on Wednesday. 20 minutes later, Hennessy found 7 additional pieces of female clothing nearby, including pantyhose, a bra, a gray silk blouse, a shoe, and lingerie, though it appeared that these were in the forest for a longer period than the pillow. The evidence was brought back for testing, and it was determined that the blood found on the pillowcase was a match to Laura. Additional examination of her mattress revealed fresh blood spots. In fact, it was realized that a large portion of the mattress was soaked in blood after luminol was applied. Using a portable Luma Light unit, technicians collected additional hair and stain evidence from the bedroom. After the reveal via luminol, some officials stated that they knew deep down that Laura was dead. Her mother, Penny, even thought the same, calling a number of family friends to inform them that Laura had been murdered. Shortly after, detectives actually spotted Haddon driving on East-West Highway in Bethesda. They approached him and he agreed to talk. A detective told Haddon that police needed his help to find Laura. Haddon dropped to his knees on the street and said, "I'm so scared, I just want to die." When a television news crew pulled up at that moment, Haddon changed entirely and began ranting nonsensically, but when the cameras left, he calmed down again and agreed to go to the police station. At police headquarters, he repeated his alibi account of his movements. Officials asked him whether he thought Laura was pretty, to which Haddon said, "I never paid much attention to her." Officials then said, "We found the pillow in the woods." This statement had a visible effect on Haddon and his eyes filled with tears. As more pressure was applied, Haddon asked to leave and was allowed to go. 2 weeks later, on November 6th, investigators were able to detect a fingerprint on Laura's pillowcase. This print was traced back to Haddon Clark. That same night at 10:17 p.m., police located Clark's truck parked in the lot of Bethesda First Baptist Church. An arrest team of 8 officers approached the truck and found Haddon asleep, covered with a quilt, holding a teddy bear. An officer knocked on the driver's side window and said, "You're under arrest for the murder of Laura Hoodling." Haddon simply replied, "Okay." When police had seized his truck, they found 3 bed sheets, hair samples, and a trove of personal papers. A former co-worker at What's Up Bagel told investigators that Haddon had confided in him about having a campsite in the Bethesda-Rockville area. Sergeant Phillips located the campsite from a state police helicopter near the old Georgetown Road exit to I-270. Searches with cadaver dogs turned up items at the site but did not immediately find Laura's body. Investigators also discovered in Haddon's Kensington storage locker items exactly matching the description of the woman the housekeeper had seen leaving Penny's house on October 19th. This included the khaki pants, trench coat, size 12 shoes, and multiple wigs. They also found items belonging to Penny. These included a blue jacket, a full slip, as well as a crystal unicorn, a camera, and Laura's black leather Coach bag that had been missing from the house. Haddon was indicted on December 17th, 1992. On June 14th, 1993, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Prosecutors accepted the lesser plea at least partly because they did not yet have Laura's body, and a trial for first-degree murder without a recovered victim would have been difficult to win. He was sentenced to 30 years in maximum security prison. The day after entering his guilty plea, he led his attorneys to the location of Laura's burial site. Her remains were recovered in the wooded tract near his former campsite, approximately a half mile from the Hoodling home on Juilliard Drive. She had been there for nearly 8 months. While imprisoned at Western Correctional Institution, Haddon was housed with Jack Truitt, a long-haired, bearded man whom Haddon genuinely believed to be Jesus Christ. Over time, he began confessing to Truitt in extraordinary detail. He described slashing the throat of a little girl in a pink bathing suit, drinking her blood, eating her flesh, and burying her body in the woods. Truitt recalled the rancid smell emanating from Haddon's cell and discovered 15 cartons of warm milk in Haddon's locker. When confronted about this, Haddon said, "It reminds me of decaying bodies." Truitt decided to call in police and inform them about Haddon's confessions. He never asked for reduced sentences or special treatment in return, he simply provided the information. In 1999, Haddon was tried and convicted for Michelle's murder even before her remains were recovered. Then on January 7th, 2000, he led Montgomery County Police to a ravine near Route 29 in Silver Spring, where Michelle's remains were found. Police also found her blood in the wooden floorboards of Jeffrey Clark's old upstairs bedroom, confirming the initial location of the murder. Haddon received a second consecutive 30-year sentence. Now, interestingly, Haddon's story only becomes more intriguing after he was imprisoned. For one, a lot of information was revealed regarding Haddon's female alter ego, Kristen Bluefin. This identity had been present for years before he murdered anyone in the confirmed record, evolving in parallel with his cross-dressing, thefts, and his growing instability. He wore women's clothing with increasing frequency throughout the 1980s, first in private, then in public, then boldly enough to commit crimes in broad daylight while presenting as a woman. By the time FBI Special Agent Lou Luciano first sat down across from Haddon in the late 1990s at Western Correctional Institution, Kristen was a fully inhabited identity that Haddon could slip into and out of mid-conversation. Luciano had been around hardened criminals all around the world and described these individuals as some of the most evil people on the planet. However, he found Haddon to be in a category entirely his own. He said, "It's like sitting with Satan." The detail that unnerved him most was not the obvious menacing effect Haddon carried, but rather the seamless ability to transition from one identity to another. Haddon would don a wig if one was available, change his posture, soften his voice, and adopt a different persona, and then, without warning, shift back to Haddon. Investigators who studied the pattern concluded that Kristen was not simply a dissociative state Haddon fell into involuntarily, but a performance that he deployed as a wall. This would put distance between his confirmed actions and any legal or moral accountability. Haddon could claim Kristen did it, but the identity would refuse to surface in any court-like setting. Additionally, he signed his name as Kristen in letters from prison. When investigators asked him to describe her, he said that Kristen was a mean who ate raw flesh and had a habit of hiding stuff. These descriptors describe his crimes against Michelle and Laura, leading some to believe that he genuinely thought that his Kristen persona was the real culprit. Luciano noted that all of the alternate personalities were women, not just Kristen, and that Haddon loved the attention the persona brought him. This hunger for attention is a critical thread. Whether dressed as Kristen, confessing to Jack Truitt, or demanding investigators take him shopping for women's clothes, Haddon's behavior was consistently oriented toward visibility, toward being watched and making himself the center of every interaction. Another striking moment from the interrogations was the time Haddon identified the face of Kristen Bluefin. During one session, Luciano asked him to draw a picture of Kristen. He produced the drawing, which showed a blonde woman with large, wide blue eyes. Luciano looked at the drawing and noticed an immediate, unmistakable resemblance. The face looked almost exactly like FBI Special Agent Desiree Smith, who was part of the investigative team. Investigators arranged to bring Smith into the room. When she appeared, Haddon immediately smiled and said, "You're Kristen." From that point forward, investigators used Smith's presence as a tool to elicit more information from Haddon. He opened up more readily when she was present. He seemed to believe on some level that the physical embodiment of Kristen had walked into the room and that the identity he had built over a lifetime had somehow externalized itself in another person. Whether this was a genuine schizophrenic experience or a manipulative performance designed to prolong the attention the interrogations gave him is impossible to determine from the outside. It could very well have been both simultaneously. During his imprisonment, Haddon produced hundreds of drawings that investigators treated as potential evidence and as possible maps. The drawings are almost entirely portraits of wide-eyed women with large blue eyes and landscape scenes such as the rolling dunes of Cape Cod, wooded areas, fields, and open terrain that investigators suspected might be reference points for burial sites or crime scenes. Whether any of the drawings represent actual burial sites has never been definitively established. Haddon was aware that the drawings were being studied, which gives him every incentive to make them deliberately ambiguous. On December 15, 2000, 11 months after Michelle Dorr's remains had been recovered, Haddon led investigators to the former property of his maternal grandparents in Wellfleet, Massachusetts on Cape Cod. As mentioned at the beginning of the video, he had spent summers there as a child. When his father and grandparents passed away, they were also buried in the Wellfleet Cemetery. When investigators dug in the garden of the grandparents' former property, they found a plastic bucket buried in the ground. Inside it were more than 200 pieces of women's jewelry. Haddon told investigators the items were trophies from his victims over the course of what he described as decades of killing. Among the items in the bucket was Laura's high school class ring. Some portion of the items could plausibly have been stolen through Haddon's extensive history of theft from churches, stores, homes, and individuals. Before the confirmed murders, he had been arrested multiple times for stealing from women. There was heavy debate on this issue, with some investigators arguing that the jewelry collection was primarily a theft archive and that the claim to have killed all its owners was another manipulation to maintain relevance. Others, including Luciano, took a more cautious position that you could never fully rule out the possibility that Haddon's actual kill total was far higher than 2. During the interrogation sessions of the late 1990s and early 2000s, Haddon told investigators he had killed several women in the sand dunes during the years he spent working on Cape Cod, a span roughly covering 1974 to 1982. He described murders committed in the dunes near Provincetown with enough details that investigators found it compelling, but it was impossible to verify. He gave terrain details, seasonal details, and in at least one case, a description of what he had done to the body. In one account, he described killing a woman he had met in Vermont in 1975 or 1976, transporting her to Wellfleet, killing her, and burying her on his grandfather's land. Her remains were never found. In another, he described killing a woman and burying her in the Provincetown Cemetery under a stone that said "Unidentified body found, Point D, July 26, 1974. This was the grave of the Lady of the Dunes, an infamous unsolved murder case. From January through April 2000, investigators led Haddon on a series of excavation attempts in the sand dunes near Provincetown. The searches were unsuccessful. He suggested that the shifting of the sand dunes over 25 years had moved or covered whatever he claimed was buried there. Another interesting detail that doesn't exactly involve Haddon himself is the fact that there were actually 2 killers that came out of the Clark family. Bradfield Clark, Haddon's older brother, appeared to have navigated the family's dysfunction more successfully than his siblings, at least by external measures. He was academically accomplished, pursuing a doctorate in social psychology and lacking only the completion of his dissertation before earning the degree. He held a job and functioned well in society. He seemed to have escaped the trajectory that consumed Haddon. Then in July 1984, Bradfield invited a couple he knew from work to his apartment in Los Gatos, California for dinner. At the last minute, the husband canceled. The woman, Patricia Mack, arrived alone. Bradfield strangled Patricia, then used a kitchen knife to dismember her body. He loaded her remains into 3 trash bags and placed them in the trunk of his car. According to investigators, Bradfield also cooked and consumed parts of her. After the killing, Bradfield attempted to take his own life. When he was discovered and arrested, he chose to plead guilty to second-degree murder, a decision his family has said he made specifically to spare his parents the ordeal of a full trial. He received a sentence of 15 years to life in prison. When asked why he did it, Bradfield said, "I was abusing alcohol back then. I don't remember anything about the crime." And this rabbit hole in the Clark family goes even further when examining Haddon Sr.'s final moments. He died of cancer in September 1986 and did not see the full consequences of what his household produced. Before his death, he confided to Jeffrey that he had long suffered from what he identified as manic depression, a revelation that prompted Jeffrey to seek an evaluation, leading to his own diagnosis and treatment with lithium. But Sr.'s death carried another weight. Shortly after Haddon was first questioned by Montgomery County Police in connection with Michelle Dorr's disappearance, which occurred in June 1986, Sr. took his own life at his daughter Allison's home in Rhode Island. Whether this was connected to the investigation, to his own guilt about the family he had built, or simply to a disease he could no longer manage, the timing was deeply unsettling. Ultimately, despite never being officially tied to any other crimes, Haddon remains a person of interest in cold cases across over 20 states. Today, he is 73 years old and is incarcerated at the Eastern Correctional Institution in Westover, Maryland. As of 2024, Haddon became eligible for parole, alarming virtually everyone who worked his case.